Welcome to part 2 of our Google Sheets dashboard project, and by the end of this video we're going to have accomplished two things. Number one, we're going to have our dashboard completely outlined with all of our header bars, and then number two, we will have created our first KPI bar graph as seen on the right side here. Some of the features of this graph are the ability to select the test that you would like to look at, as well as the starting date, and all of the values in the graph will automatically scale to the size of the graph so that you can look at any metric that you want. So let's get after it. Okay, so we are back and we are starting with the dashboard as we left it off with in the last video. And as a reminder, we got as far as entering in all of our data. And then when we select the athlete's name, it will automatically update their picture, position, date of birth, etc. So now it's time to start to outline the actual pieces of our dashboard so that we know where we're going to be putting everything. And the first thing that I'm going to outline is just that header bar that you might have seen in the intro video, and I have all of the cell references kind of marked off, so I'm just going to go ahead and do those now. The first one is going to go from F all the way to U and then down to U4, so we go F2 to U4, and I'm going to merge and center those, and then I'll put sort of a darker color on that to signify our border. And our first line graph goes from M6, so right here, all the way across to U7, and I'll merge and center those and put a dark color in those. And then I'm going to just copy this, and the next one goes at M26, so down to 26, and I'll paste that in there. And then the final one goes here at M46. And then I know that we're gonna put our trend report from F17 all the way across to K18, and I will put that in now. Put a dark color in there. And then finally, I know that the radar graph that we'll create in one of our last videos will go from F36 to K37. And again, I will highlight those and center that there. So we're starting to put the pieces of our dashboard together. And usually this is something you could do as you go through, or you can do it at the end once you've got all your visuals created and see how they fit. Because we're doing this project and I already know what everything's going to look like at the end, I'll just go ahead and do this now. And I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see kind of how this project's going to come together. You can see we have the main header of the dashboard, and then we have 5 spots where we're going to be able to put visualizations. So that's number one. Now, number two, what we want to do is actually start to set up our ability to select from our line graph and create that line graph. So a couple things that we're going to need to do is, one, I'm going to need to create some drop-down menus where we can actually select from the different tests. So I'm going to just copy this filters line that we created before, and I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste that right in A9. And I'm just going to call this KPI chart number 1, because that is going to be the spot where we have our first KPI chart. And I will copy this drop down menu twice. And one of them is going to be select test, and the next one will be select start date. And we already have this information completed. I'll just make the font a little bit smaller here so that we can see both of those. We already have the list created, so we'll just go ahead and do data validation for those lists. So under select test, we'll go to data and then data validation. And from this, we'll go select data range, and we want to go to lists, and our tests are all stored in C2 all the way down to C. So we'll select that whole range and hit OK, and then save. And when we go back, we should be able to select now from any of our tests. And for the same thing for our start dates, we've already pulled out all of the dates. So you can see how when you do some of the upfront work, a lot of this becomes pretty easy. So for our select start date, we'll go data, data validation, we'll go back to lists, and all of our dates are going to be in B2 all the way down. So we'll select B2 and then double dots B, and that just selects the whole column. And then when I hit save, now we have the ability to select all of the start dates. So I'll put one in there for now, so that we have something to work with. So that's step 1. And now step 2 is let's actually put the title of our dashboard on our dashboard. For this, we're going to use some word logic. So we're actually going to put a formula up here in this top. I'm going to make sure the text is white so that we'll be able to see it. So when I type in there, we should be able to see. What we're going to do is in this box, the header bar, I'm going to type equals, And then I'm going to use quotations to signify that we want to output text. So in this case, let's put in KPI dashboard, and you can see that Google Sheets is outputting that. And then I'll put double dots because we're going to want to put the athlete name after, and then a space and another quotation because I want to leave a space between the double dots and the athlete name that we've selected. Then I want to join something to it. So we're going to use the and, I think it's called an ampersand, and then the cell that we want to join is the actual athlete name. So I'll select that cell, and when I hit enter, you can see that now we have a dynamic title. I'll put it in the middle, make the font a heck of a lot bigger, and now we have that KPI dashboard and the athlete that we've selected. And as I actually change my athletes, the title on the dashboard is going to change. So that's just a way to join things together. Again, I'll give you a look at that. It's just anything in quotations, you want to put output as text, and then the and sign, and then you can output a value from a cell. Now the next piece is we're going to create a formula that actually starts to scale our tests for us. So what I'm going to do is create another sheet, and we'll call this test setup. And what I want to create is the ability to pull out the max and min value from our test. What this looks like is I'm going to want to have the test name, team min, and the team max, and then I'm going to have a box that says min is better. And I'll show you why in 1 second. Let me just make these all a little bit bigger. So for test name, we already have a list that allows us to select that. So I'm going to copy that, and then I will paste that under test setup. So now I'm able to select any of my tests. I don't really want the coloring here. I just want the test. So I'm going to drag this down a bunch of times and then delete it. And then under min better, I want a check mark icon, and I'll show you why in 1 second. So I'm going to insert checkboxes. Okay, then the next thing we need to pull out is actually the team minimum value. So what I'm going to use is a formula called min equals min, which is going to pull out the minimum value in a numeric data set. And we're going to open that up. And the value that we want to pull out is we need to match it to the actual test selected. So we're going to use an index function here. So I'm going to type min bracket index. And the reference that we want is our full data set. So I'm going to go to the data tab and select A2 all the way across. And I'm going to give it a few extra cells just in case I want to add some data. So it says right now A2 to Q2. And what I'll do is delete that 2 so that it takes the entire data set. And then from there, I'm going to hit comma. I don't really care what row it is, but I want to select a column. So I'll hit comma one more time. And for the column, what I need to do is use a match. So I'm going to say match, open that up. And the search key that we want is if I go back to test setup, it is going to be the test that I've selected. And then where do I want to search for that? I need to search for it in the headers. So if you remember the headers, we select data 1, and then I can close that off all the way, 3 brackets, and hit enter. And you should see now it pulls out the minimum value from that data set. So just as a reminder how that worked, what we've done is we use min, but then for the values, we've used an index match. So the index looks through our entire data set and then matches the column as the array that we're looking. And that pulls out the minimum data set. So we're going to do the same thing now for the max. So I'll just copy this and I'm going to paste it in here. And instead of min, if we use max, what you'll notice is it's going to pull out the max data set or the max value. Now, if I select another test, it's going to pull out the minimum and maximum values for all of those tests. So let's go back, give you one more trick now. If you see this index match formula that we've used, we're going to be using this a lot. So we're going to be referencing data A2 all the way across a lot, and we're going to be referencing the headers a lot in a lot of these different functions. So what we're going to do is create a named range for both of those. So what I'm going to do is I'll go back to my data tab and I'm going to go to data and then down to named ranges. On the right hand side, it's going to say add a range, and I'm going to make one called data. And I want that to refer to, I'll select data range. I want that to refer to A2 all the way, let's say to Z, and hit OK and done. Oh, it's going to say invalid range because I don't have all the way to Z on my actual sheet. So let's say Y. Done. So you can see now that that is referring to everything from A2 to Y. And I want to add one more for headers. So let's say headers. And we want that to refer to data 1, 1, which is this whole basically row. Okay, there. And then I might want to create one more that's just the test headers. So I'll go add range and we'll say test headers. And instead of data 1, 1, we'll just go E1, which is the start of the tests. So we'll go E1. So we have now our 3 named ranges. So if we go back to our test setup, where I have now data A2 to Q, I could just replace that with the word data and the formula is still going to work. And then where I have data 1, 1, we can replace that with the word headers and the formula is still going to work. Okay, so that's just a quick way to make your formulas a little bit more easy to manage. So I'm going to copy that over and put that in the other formula. And instead we'll put max. So now for something like a 10-meter sprint, visually, we want a lower value to be representative of the max value because a faster 10-meter sprint has a lower value. So that's where this min better box comes in. So we're going to add a little if statement to this. So what this is going to look like is in front of this formula, we're going to say if, and then this cell equals true. So if that equals true, then we know that the min value is better. Then what we're going to do is actually pull out the max. So I'll type in max here and then put a bracket for if it's false and then close the whole thing off at the end and hit OK. So what you can see now is it's going to pull out the higher value because that is a worse value in this case, or if I unclick it, it'll pull out the lower value. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing for the team max. I'll just flip the min and the maxes. So I'll copy that formula over, paste that in there, and where it says max, we now want the minimum value, and where it says min, we now want the max value. And hit OK. So now it flips these two values whenever I click this. But for something like a counter movement jump, if we drag this down, we would still want the maximum value to be there and the minimum value to be there. So it just depends on the type of data that you're working with. So this just allows you to set up any test that you might be working on. And again, if we click the box, it just flips them. Now the last formula I want to add in here is just a simple if error that just makes everything blank. So what we'll do is we'll just hit if error, open that up, and then at the end we'll put comma, double quotations, and hit enter. And we'll do the same thing on the next one. If error, open that up, comma, double quotations, and then close that off. And that's just going to allow us to drag this down, and you won't see anything unless there is actually a test selected. Again, something like a pro agility, we would want to have min better selected. So let's put our tests in there so that we're going to be able to select them. So we have all of our tests set up now, except for pro agility, we just need to mark that a minimum value is better. And this is going to be really important because now we want to convert these to a value out of 100 when we go to graph these values. So we'll go back to our KPI dashboard and we need to create one more sheet now to start our first graph. So I'm going to put add sheet and we'll call this data reference and we'll start to create this sheet. What I want to do is just along the top, because I know I'm working on KPI chart 1, I'm just going to mark this in black because that signifies the area that I'm working in, text white, and I usually just mark all of the charts that I'm working with. And then I'm going to want to pull out a few values for my formulas. So I need the athlete, I need the position, start date, test, min, and the max values. And I'm just going to color these a separate color because those are going to be kind of references that I need. And then along the bottom, we're going to pull out the dates, the values, and the standard. And in a future video, we'll do the team averages as well. But for now, we're going to do these values here. So in terms of athlete, we know where that is stored. That is stored on my KPI dashboard. So all I'm going to put here is equals and then select the box where we select the athlete from, hit enter. In terms of position, we already have a formula that does that for us. So if I go back to my KPI dashboard and I select this formula here and copy that and bring it over to my reference tab, paste that in there. Now, instead of looking at B3, we want to look at a B2, which is where our athlete is stored, and I hit enter and it's going to pull out wide receiver. Start date, we're going to be selecting that from a drop-down box, so I can type equals, KPI dashboard, select start date, enter. Test, we're going to be selecting that from a drop-down box, so I can type equals, KPI dashboard, select test, enter. And now the min and the max values, I can use a VLOOKUP formula to find. So what that looks like is it's going to be equals VLOOKUP, open that up, and the lookup that I want is the test that we have selected. So in this case, B5. Where do I want to look for that? Because we're looking for min and max, we're going to look for that in our test setup. So I'm going to look from A1 all the way to D. And I'm going to lock this in because this is never going to change. So I'll just use the F4 key, and that's going to put $ references in front of all of these values. And that means that as I drag this formula, it's not going to change. And then I'm going to hit comma. And then what index do I want to return? Well, the min value is stored in the 1, 2, 3 column. And then these are not sorted, so I'll use the word false and close that off and hit enter. And we'll have pulled out the min value for the Pro Agility. And we're going to do the same thing. I'll just copy this formula and I'm going to paste that in where the max is, and the max is stored in 4. Okay, so there are our values. And if we were to switch the test, let's say counter movement jump, because that was 20 and 40, you can see that it has pulled those out. Okay, so these are all of the references that we're going to need for our actual formula. So now under the dates formula, we're going to use one formula to pull out the date and the values of the test based on the athlete name and the start date and the test. So what this is going to look like, and this is a rather long formula, so I'm going to break this down into parts. Equals, filter, open this up, and let's do it for just the dates first. So we're going to type index, open that up, and if you can remember where we want to look in the data that we already referenced in our name manager. The row that we want is going to be all of them, so we're going to leave that blank, but then the column that we want is going to be the date column. So I'm going to type match, open that up, and I want to match the word date, and I want to match that in the headers. And then close that off, close the whole thing off. So now what I have to do is give this formula conditions. So all we do to do that is at the second last comma, or so the second last bracket, I'm going to hit comma, and I want to match it when the date is greater than or equal to the start date to only pull out those dates. So what I can type is index, open that up, and what I want to match is, again, the data. We want to reference the data, and comma, comma, match, open that up, and we want to match date again in headers, and then close that off. But we want it when it is greater than or equal to the date that we've selected, which is in B4. Now I should be able to close that off, and you can see that it will return all of the dates that are greater than or equal to the date selected in B4. And just to make sure that that works, let's select one down here and go back to our data reference. So now you can see that it returns all of those dates. Now it's returning them for all of the athletes. So you can see 2020-01-15, 2020-01-15. It's returned 3 times because we have 3 athletes in our data set. So let's put this back. The next thing we have to match for, or the next condition that we want, is when it matches the actual athlete name. So I can put comma, and in condition 2, we can use this same formula, and I'll just copy that over. And instead of date, we want to match athlete name. in headers, when it is equal to, instead of B4, we want B2. And I should now be able to hit enter. And you can see now it's only going to give me the dates for that specific athlete. And then the last piece of this is we want to now pull out the actual tests for that athlete. So now to do that, at the first part of this formula, where I have the index to match all of the dates, what I can do is if I put a curly bracket there, on the other side of this, I can continue to do another range. So I can copy this and finish that with a curly bracket. So now we have two ranges that we're actually pulling out. So the first one will be the date. The second one that we want to pull out is actually the test. So instead of now matching the date, we want to match for B5. When I hit enter, what you'll notice is it pulls out all of the test values as well. Okay, so what this formula does is filter, index all of the dates, and then index all of the tests that match the one that we've selected. Both of those exist within curly brackets because we want two ranges. When do we want to do that? We want to do it when the start date is greater than or equal to B4 and the athlete name is equal to the athlete that we have selected. I have one more condition that I want to put on there, and that is when the test is not blank. So we only want to pull out tests that the athlete has actually completed. So we'll copy this one more time and put one more condition. So we still want to go through the data. In this case, what we want to match for is the test selected, which is stored in B5. And we want to only do it instead of when it equals the athlete name, when it doesn't equal blank. Okay, so what this last condition is saying is match for the test selected when it's not blank. And now hit enter, and it's not going to change our data because we don't have any blank tests in our data set. I'm going to just center this and make sure that this is working. So let's change the test. Let's go to bench. Our values should have changed, and indeed they did. Let's change the start date. Our values should have changed, and indeed they did. Let's put our start date back, and let's change our athlete, and our values should change, and indeed they did. As well as we are still referencing the max and the min value. So the last formula that we're actually going to create is a standard formula. And what the standard is going to be is we're going to convert all of these values to a value out of 100 based on our max and our minimum value, so that when we graph them, no matter what test we're graphing, it won't change the scale of the actual chart that we're creating. And this is going to allow us to visualize things a little bit easier. So for the standards formula, we have a formula that basically takes this and turns it into a value out of 100. And how that kind of works is it looks like this. It looks like the value minus minimum value, and that is in brackets. And then that is over top of the max minus the min in brackets. And then the whole thing is going to be times 100. So what this will do is actually convert it to a value out of 100. So let's see what that actually looks like in practice. If I was to type equals, say 297 minus the minimum value, close that bracket off, and I'm going to open one more because I know that I need another one, and then divide that by the max minus the min, put brackets around those, and then put a bracket around the whole thing, and then times the whole thing by 100. You can see that now the score of that is 57. And what that means is that is about 57% of the way between the minimum and the maximum value. So this is just a good way to visualize your data. But what I want to be able to do is actually do it for the whole kind of data set here. Another thing I like to do with this is wrap the whole thing in an mround function, which will just make it to a 0.5. So if I type in mround, open bracket up, and then at the end, type in 0.5, it just rounds it to the nearest 0.5 sort of value. So from there, what we're going to do is actually wrap this in an array formula. So how this formula is going to end up looking is equals array formula, ARRAY formula, open that up. If, let's say, values all the way down, so B10 to B does not equal blank, then what we want to do is perform this calculation, and we want to put the whole thing in an array formula. So I'll type in mround, open bracket, array formula, open that up, and now instead of B10, we want to look at B10 all the way to B, and we don't want these references to change, so we're going to lock those all in, and then I'll put my bracket around the 100 to lock that into the array formula. And then if it does equal, we'll go to the end of this formula. If it does, then just give us nothing, and then we'll close the whole thing off. And when I hit enter, it should have converted all of them to a value out of 100. Okay, so we'll go over that formula one more time. So what we're doing is using an array formula to look if there is a value in the cell, which there certainly always will be. But if there is, then we want to create that value out of 100 with an array formula and round it to 0.5. And if there isn't, then we just want to return nothing. And I'll hit enter one more time. So now let's create our first KPI chart. So what I'm actually going to do is highlight all of the dates and highlight the standard, just holding control. And I'm going to go to insert chart. And it's going to give us this line chart. And I'm going to change this on the right hand side to a combo chart because I know I'm going to want to add lines to it later. I don't really want this title, so I should be able to just click on this title and hit delete. And now we just have to play around a little bit with some of these kind of things here. So I'll take away the standard. I don't necessarily care about dates. And in this chart now, let's sort of figure this out. So we'll go to setup, and for the ranges, I want this to be dynamic. So instead of going all the way to A24 for our different ranges, in this case, this is the date. So A9 to A24, I want it to go all the way down. So we'll take the 24 out, and then C9 to C24, again, we'll take the 24 out. And I want to add a range for the actual values. So I'll put add range, select all the way down. And again, I want that to go all the way down, and I'll hit OK. And now we'll go down to our x-axis, and we want that to have the dates. That works well. And then we want to graph the standard. That works well as well. But here we have an option to add labels. So if I click on the triple dots, hit add labels. For the labels, we want the actual values. So what this is doing is it will graph the out of 100 score, but display the score of the test. And now we'll go to customize, and then our series. Let's go to our actual standard. And for our data labels, I just like to put them at the bottom, and we'll change the color of this series to sort of match the one that we're using on our dashboard. So if I copy this now, Control C, I should be able to paste this right on our dashboard, and we'll just sort of stick this in that area there, make it a little bit bigger. And I'll close that off. And now we have the first sort of graph in our dashboard. As I change the test or the start dates, it's going to automatically change based on the selection that we make. And what is it displaying? It's displaying the converted score out of 100, but giving us the actual value of the test, so that when we are looking at something like a 10-meter sprint, the faster values are closer to 100, making those look more advantageous, whereas the slower ones are lower. Because we switched our min and max versus a counter movement jump, the higher jumps are closer to 100 and the lower ones are down near the bottom. And this is just a great way to scale your graphs when you're doing this sort of monitoring or KPI reporting to make everything look good. As you can see, nothing changes no matter which test we actually select. It's just the actual size of the bars. So I hope this video helps you out. And in the next video, what we'll do is add the checkboxes for the team and position averages, as well as copy this over a couple times and finish our 3 graphs. So until then, I will see you in the next video. Thank you.